Hey everyone, welcome to the investor.bet AFL Round 4 betting review video. Really good last couple of weeks in the AFL. We're now on a 14-1 run with our AFL bets and 26-10 overall on the season at an average odds of $1.83. In this video, I'm going to review all the games from round number 4, go through what happened in those games, how certain teams won those games, how the other teams lost those games, what went right, what went wrong, and importantly, look at these matchups from a betting perspective in round number 4. So we're going to look at which teams the money came for, was there more money for the over, the under, and what ended up happening so we can get those trends on how teams are performing, plus the overall trends. In round number 4, 5 of the 8 games went under the total points line, so majority of games going under. Home teams won and covered 5 of the 8 games. Favorites won 7 of the 8 games. The only underdog to win was St Kilda beating Port Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval. Definitely really like St Kilda in that matchup. Favorites covered the spread in 5 of the 8 games. So the underdogs who covered, obviously St Kilda, then also Richmond covered against the Brisbane Lions. The Lions are now 0-4 against the spread so far this season. And Adelaide, when losing by 1 point against the Gold Coast Suns, also covered the spread. Looking at each of these matchups individually, if you want to break these down deeper and analyze the stats with these sides, definitely look into the AFL Bet Finders. We're going to cover more of that when we look at round 5 coming up next week. But first game of the round, we had Collingwood versus Carlton on Thursday night. This game was expected to be low scoring, especially with the rain that was expected to hit throughout this game and on the day of. Both sides were very inaccurate. Collingwood 8 goals 15, Carlton 6 goals 10. That helped the game go under the total points line. For this matchup, the market was right from both perspectives. So firstly, on the under, it opened 167.5, moved down a point to 166.5, and obviously went under. And then the money came for Collingwood. They were backed in from $1.54 into $1.42, and Collingwood covered the spread as well. For this matchup, once again, Carlton led at halftime. Even though they're 0-4 on the season, they've led at halftime in all 4 of their games so far, and it's just this consistent fade in the second half. After halftime, where Carlton were leading by 4 points with 4 goals, 5-29 to 3-7-25. Collingwood outscored them with 5 goals, 8 in the second half to Carlton's 2 goals, 5. And Collingwood ended up winning this matchup by 17 points. Collingwood were plus 26 points in points from turnovers. And with those plus 26, they also only kicked 4 goals and 12 behind. So they could have won this game by much more if they were a bit more accurate in that situation and just overall in general. And for Carlton, one thing that's probably a little bit concerning, even though they're playing in wet conditions, Carlton only had 4 marks inside 50, which is well below average and also their season average. For Collingwood, that's now 3 straight wins, which definitely sets up a good clash against the Swans at the Adelaide Oval on Friday night. And they also go into that game with a 2-day rest advantage, having played on the Thursday compared to the Crows playing on the Gold Coast on Saturday. Then for Carlton, they're still yet to score over 75 points in a game this season, but they do have the West Coast and North Melbourne coming up over the next 2 weeks. They're yet to cover the spread in any matchup, and all 4 Carlton games have gone under the total points line so far, largely due to the fact they're struggling to score, but also from a conceded perspective for Carlton. The most points they've conceded so far this season was 83. This match against Collingwood, where they conceded 63, this was the lowest they've conceded so far. All the other games were between 80 and 83 points. On Friday night, Geelong beat Melbourne by 39 points, 85 points to 46. Geelong covered the spread. They are backed in from $1.28 to $1.22. So once again, pretty big favorites. The under hit in this game at 171.5 and it moved down during the week from 173.5 to 171.5. So the market was right on all facets of this game. Overall, Melbourne, so this matchup, Petrarca kicked a real early goal for Melbourne, got them off to a good start. And from that point, Geelong kicked the next 5 goals to build a 29-point lead early on in the second quarter. And then throughout the second and third terms, like throughout this period, Geelong were kind of holding that 10 to 25 point margin throughout. They always felt like they were in control of this game. And then they kicked 4 goals to none in the final term to run out those 39-point winners. Geelong were also plus 79 in uncontested possessions for this game, so had the majority of the ball, won the stoppage clearances 26 to 22, led the free kick count, and then also had nearly 100 extra disposals, and the majority of those were kicks. We'll also want to highlight that here for Geelong, 165 marks in this game compared to Melbourne, just 82. Geelong were just kicking the ball around and pretty much running a training drill out there. 17 marks inside 50 to just 5, so plus 12 differential in favor of Geelong there as well. Really dominant numbers, and a 39-point margin doesn't really reflect the absolute dominance. Like, it could be a touch of Geelong just overusing the ball a little bit, contribute to them only scoring the 85 points, because with that much dominance of possession, you would expect them to at least score 100 points. For Geelong, like, they did what they needed to do to bounce back against those losses against Brisbane and St Kilda over the past couple of weeks. And now they have a really good contest coming up against Adelaide, who will look to bounce back, and overall are still in good form, 3-1 on the season. And also Hawthorn in the following week in that Easter Monday clash. For Melbourne, this is their worst start to the season since all the way back in 2012. That season, they lost their first 9 games. They're 0-4 right now. That season where they lost those 9 straight games in 2012, that losing streak ended with a 6-point win against Essendon, who is the side that they face this week at the Adelaide Oval. Probably one concern for Melbourne is that their scoring has dropped each week. So first game against GWS had 74, against North Melbourne had 66, against Gold Coast had 62, and against Geelong, 46 points. There's not much more to go down from 46 points, so it's only really going to go up from there, especially playing against Essendon. But Melbourne definitely in desperate need of a win. First game on Saturday, probably the best game of the round by quite some way. Gold Coast winning by 1 point against the Crows. Gold Coast now 3-0 on the season. This was Adelaide's first loss. Really good game, and was a little bit tarnished by some controversial late calls. There were no points in about the final 7 or 8 minutes of this game. Once Adelaide bridged the margin to 1 point, you can see no final scores after that Riley Thilthorpe goal. When Adelaide were going inside 50, there was some questionable calls. Adelaide wanted free kicks. They weren't paid. Gold Coast were then paid some iffy free kicks. And Gold Coast dominated the free kick count in this game as well. So I think all that kind of contributed to it. You can see 25 to 14 in free kicks. But looking at how the game kind of played out, Gold Coast started well, kicking the first 2 goals. Adelaide fought back, especially early on in the second term. And this goal was late in the first, but they had a period here of 4 straight goals to put themselves 10 points in front midway through the second quarter. I think Gold Coast worked their way back into it. They had their own period of 4 straight goals into the third quarter. Then very even late, back and forth. It was a game that really could have gone either way. But Adelaide did well to keep it as close as they did realistically. They lost the inside 50s, lost the free kick count quite dramatically. And also, Gold Coast had 26 scoring shots to the Crows' 20. So Adelaide were very accurate, kicking 14-6. Gold Coast wasted some chances. Looking through the stats, Adelaide had the majority of the ball, an extra 50 disposals overall. Both sides fairly low efficiency rates at 68 and 71%. And also, it's kind of low efficiencies for these sides going inside 50. And Adelaide did dominate the clearances 46 to 35, particularly at the stoppages where they are plus that 11. Adelaide 67 turnovers compared to the Gold Coast Suns 58. For Gold Coast, they're now 3-0 on the season. This is their equal best start in the history of the club. That's equal to 2016. They have North Melbourne and Richmond coming up over the next 2 weeks, which are definitely both winnable games. And Gold Coast, a big chance of going 5-0 to start the season. Looking back through their previous season records, they are good starters. So this year with Hardwick in charge, it'll be interesting to see whether they can continue this right throughout the entire season. With Adelaide, first loss of the season, but still a good overall performance. They've covered the spread in all 4 games. Adelaide covered this matchup but the money was for Gold Coast $1.82 into $1.75. This matchup just went under the total, which ended up at 183.5 and moved down from 185.5. So the market got the total right in this game for Adelaide. Over the next couple of weeks, they face Geelong in GWS, which is going to be a very, very good test for them. The following game on Saturday, Brisbane Lions, fairly dominant winners over Richmond. Lions winning by 28 points. Richmond definitely closed the gap. They're losing by 42 at three-quarter time, but kicked 4 goals to 2 in that final term to make it a little bit more of a respectable margin. Prior to that, Brisbane had extended their margin at each of the three-quarter intervals. 42 disposals in this game for Lachie Neale. He has a history of racking up big numbers against the Tigers. He had 51 against them quite some time ago now. But overall, for Lachie Neale, one thing I want to highlight, in this season, he had 42 against Richmond, 35 against West Coast. But in the games against Sydney and Geelong, he only had 10 and 20 disposals in those games. Gets plenty of the ball against the lower tier sides, not much of it against the good teams. Lions had 60 inside 50s to Richmond 40 in this game. This is kind of what we expected. The game's been played down Brisbane's end. They would get plenty of scoring shots, 28 of them in the end. They're pretty accurate, which was good for us to get over the 110.5 team total. Good score from Richmond. This was their highest score of the season. There's a few things I wanted to highlight in this game. Brisbane were dominant at the center clearances, 17-8. But this is one thing that's very interesting. Richmond, 15 marks inside 50. This is a big, big number and definitely of concern for the Brisbane Lions. Only 53 tackles for Richmond, though. Their chase and effort without the ball definitely lacking a little bit. Brisbane were plus 28 in scores from stoppages, but both sides were able to capitalize on each other's turnovers, which were pretty low for this game, 53 and 52. Brisbane kicking 9 goals from turnovers, Richmond kicking 8 goals from turnovers. As I said, this was Richmond's biggest score of the season so far at 90 points, but since that win against Carlton, they've now lost 3 games in a row. They've conceded 118 or more points in all 3 of those games, and all 3 have gone over the total points line thanks to their opposition rolling up big scores against them. They still have a few more tricky games coming up. They play Fremantle this week and then Gold Coast the following game. Brisbane Lions, the title defense has definitely started well, winning all of their 4 games so far. However, they're yet to cover the spread in any game so far. They'll face the Bulldogs in Adelaide this week, followed by a home game against Collingwood, which will be on a quick turnaround as they play the Bulldogs on Saturday and then go into that Thursday night game at home against Collingwood. For this matchup, Brisbane did drift. They were $1.07 out to $1.11. Richmond covered the spread. The total was right, 177.5 up to 178.5 and went over the number. North Melbourne versus Sydney Swans. A big win from the Swans, kicking their highest score of the season by kind of a bit of a considerable way at 117 points and also kept their opponent to the lowest score of the season. For this matchup, Sydney drifted $1.54 out to $1.70. Market was completely wrong there. And also it went under 179.5, but this total was 175.5 up to 179.5. Market got this one wrong on both sides of the equation. The first half was definitely a competitive. North Melbourne were hanging around 22-point margin at halftime, but in the second half, and particularly in the third term, Sydney really kicked right away in this game. During that third term, they kicked 7 goals, 3 to North Melbourne's, 1 goal, 2. And now going into three-quarter time was a 69-point margin. Very low-scoring fourth term. Sydney got an early goal here, but then the other 4 goals in that quarter all came in those final few minutes. Swans had plus 50 points from turnovers, which was by far the best result for them so far this season. Another game with 47 points from their defensive half. This has kind of been a bit of a pattern for Sydney so far and showing they're able to transition that ball very well from their back half and turn it into points. North Melbourne did only make 58 turnovers in this game. Pretty low number considering how many points Sydney were able to generate from those turnovers. 17 scoring shots was the end amount from 58 turnovers, which is a very, very high rate to make North Melbourne pay. North Melbourne, they're now 1-3 overall in the season, and it seems like they've kind of been playing okay, but their defense has really started to become a bit of an issue. They've now conceded 113 or more in 3 of their 4 games, with Melbourne being the only exception. We know Melbourne can't score. They have a very tough game coming up against Gold Coast Suns before they play Carlton on Good Friday, which is shaping up right now to look to be a very important game for both sides. Sydney, they responded well after losing to the Hawks and Lions in their first 2 games. They've won against Fremantle in Perth, then gone down to Melbourne to beat North Melbourne following the bye. Now covered 3 of their past 4 games. All of those have also gone under the total points line. For Sydney, it's a tricky run for them coming up over the next 4 weeks. They play Collingwood at the Adelaide Oval, which I'll talk about that game in the AFL betting trends preview video. Collingwood have a great record at the Adelaide Oval. Then they're at home against Port, up to the Gold Coast to play the Suns, and then a rivalry game against GWS. So this next month for Sydney is very important. They can win 3 of those 4 games. I think they'll be well positioned. Can't really afford to go 1-3 or 0-4, but the way they played against North Melbourne, I think they've hit form at a good time that they can then take into those games. First game on Sunday, GWS running out huge winners, 81 points against West Coast, 132 to 51. GWS covered the spread. They are backed in from $1.08 to $1.02 was the starting price. The game went over 179.5, and the market got it right, moving that number up from 174 early in the week. This was a big win for GWS. They're a touch inaccurate, like in this first term, kicking 5 goals, 6, but still had a 29-point lead with West Coast only kicking the 1 goal during that opening quarter. They definitely sorted it out in the second term, kicking 6 goals, 1, and were leading at halftime by 51 points. The third quarter was very even, just 3 goals each during that period, and was kind of it became a bit of a stalemate with the side having such a big lead. But GWS put the foot down, got their percentage up in the fourth quarter, kicking 6 goals to 1 and running out those big winners. GWS were very dominant in this game, plus 119 in the disposals, plus 7 inside 50s. They still did give up 55 inside 50s to West Coast, but that only resulted in 51 points. So GWS are one of the good rebounding sides that were spoken about in the stats prior, and West Coast's efficiency inside 50 was really poor. West Coast did win the free kick count by plus 11, not that it really made any difference whatsoever. 7 clearances, 18 to 10. One other thing quickly that I'll mention is even though GWS had 423 disposals, they went at 78%, so very efficient with the ball. Uncontested possessions, 285 to 167, and 28 marks inside 50 for GWS. It's a huge number, which is just 5 for the West Coast Eagles, 113 marks overall. All similar numbers to what we saw Geelong do against Melbourne in the Friday night game, but GWS probably just a touch more dominant in terms of the marks inside 50s, that's for sure. GWS were very good from the stoppages, kicking 11 goals, 1, 64 points. For GWS, this was a good bounce back after losing to Hawthorn last week, getting a dominant win that went over the total points line. They'll start favourites against St Kilda this week on the 7-day turnaround before another game in Adelaide against the Crows the week after. So 2 road games coming up for GWS following this matchup. West Coast, they're now 0-4 to start the season. They've conceded 94 or more points in all 4 games. It was the Brisbane Lions who scored the least against them so far. They're on the road again this week, going to Adelaide Oval to play Carlton, who are another side who yet to win a game, and both sides definitely desperate for that win. So, bit of a dull game, but important game for both sides. Then we have Port Adelaide against St Kilda. St Kilda winning as an underdog. They are backed in from 290 to 268. Covered the spread, obviously, and the game went under 165.5, which moved down from 167.5. So another game where the market got a spot on both sides. Mentioned earlier, St Kilda, the only underdog to win outright this weekend. They started very well. So Jason Horne-Francis kicked the first goal, but after that, St Kilda then went through and kicked the next 6 goals, led by 24 points at quarter time. And then they just maintained around a 20-point margin throughout the rest of the game. Every time Port Adelaide made a bit of a challenge, got the margin back to around this 10 points kind of range. St Kilda kicked the next goal, put the margin back out, and Port Adelaide just couldn't find a way to get in front. Great effort by St Kilda to still kick 89 points and have 24 scoring shots from just 44 inside 50s. Super efficient numbers for them, especially on the road in a game where Port Adelaide and their supporters were very, very desperate for a win after coming off a disappointing loss against Essendon. Statistically, if you look through this matchup and without knowing the score, you would have thought Port Adelaide would have won the game. So really, really good effort from St Kilda. Port Adelaide were very, very inefficient in their terms of their inside 50s. 10 goals from 58 inside 50 entries. St Kilda dominated the stoppage clearances 29-19. They're also plus 43 in scores from stoppages, which was largely the difference in this game. Both sides made quite a lot of turnovers, 78 and 76. Port Adelaide took advantage of it a little bit more. 62 points from turnovers compared to the Saints with just 36. But it was the efficiency that ultimately was the difference. Port Adelaide are now 1-3 on the season. Now have a game this week against Hawthorn. They'll be at home against Hawthorn. Last season, they beat them both times. First time was the game where they kicked 2 goals in the final 30 seconds to beat Hawthorn at Adelaide Oval. Then they met them there in the semi-finals where James Sicily had the shot to probably win the game for Hawthorn, but hit the post and Port Adelaide were able to scrape by. Hawthorn coming off the bye will have a lot of motivation to try and win this game. So the pressure is definitely on Port Adelaide. If they lose, they'll be 1-4 and then have to travel to Sydney to play the Swans at the SCG. So very, very tricky times now for Port Adelaide with where they're at. St Kilda, on the other hand, 3 straight wins now. Started with that big win over Geelong. They compounded it with a dominant win against Richmond, now beating Port Adelaide. They've covered the spread in their past 3 matches. They stay in Adelaide this week to play GWS, which definitely the way these two sides are playing right now will be a very, very good game. And then final game of the round, Fremantle winning at home. They're definitely taking advantage of those 3 consecutive games at Optus Stadium. The money came for them $1.72 to $1.65. Market got the total wrong. This game went over and it was 168.5 down to 166.5. But well and truly went over that number. This was a close game throughout the first quarter and majority of the second. However, midway through this term, Fremantle got a bit of momentum and really capitalized. During this period, they kicked 6 straight goals. Western Bulldogs weren't able to answer. They kicked the first 2 goals of the third term or the second half, try and give themselves a bit of hope. But it was a pretty low scoring second half overall. Fremantle was kicking 4 goals. Western Bulldogs kicking 6 goals overall. It helped them bridge the margin a little bit, but weren't really ever in a winning position in that game. It always just felt like a little bit of a bridge too far, even though the Western Bulldogs kind of dominated the stats for this game. They had slightly more disposals, but plus 19 inside 50s, plus 12 in the free kicks, and then plus 3 in the clearances, and also won the center clearances by plus 5. So all very, very good numbers for the Western Bulldogs. More marks inside 50. Another one of these games where if you just looked at the stats, you would have thought that Western Bulldogs would have won this game. However, the difference, once again, similar to the St Kilda game, was Fremantle's efficiency going inside 50. 22 scoring shots, 15 goals from just 44 entries. Even better numbers than St Kilda's, which were very, very good. And then compared to the Bulldogs, who kicked just 12 goals, 9 from 63 entries. Fremantle now have back-to-back wins and have games coming up against Richmond and Melbourne following this. They're in a very good situation to go to 4-2 on the season. Western Bulldogs now 2-2. Keep in mind those wins have come against North Melbourne and Carlton, who Carlton haven't won a game and North Melbourne have only won one other game. The game on Saturday this week against the Lions will definitely be a challenge for the Western Bulldogs, coming back off that Perth trip and then having to travel to Adelaide. So back-to-back weeks on the road for them. So that right there is my look at round 4 of the AFL season. Quickly looking at the ladder, we have Hawthorn, Brisbane, and Gold Coast all undefeated so far at the top. Gold Coast just having played the 3 games so far. Then you've got 4 sides, GWS, Adelaide, Collingwood, St Kilda, all at 3-1. All 7 of those sides really well positioned at this stage, very early on in the season. But down the bottom of the ladder, we have 7 sides: Port, North Melbourne, Essendon, and Richmond just on the 1 win. And then Carlton, Melbourne, and the West Coast all yet to win a game so far this season. Coming up this week, I'll be posting a AFL betting trends preview where I'm going to look at the betting information for the matchups for gather round in South Australia. And so stay tuned for that. And if you want to see everything I'm betting, as I mentioned, we are on 14-1 run in the AFL as it currently stands. You can view all my bets in the AFL Best Bets membership, which I'll link in the description. And that's where you can also get access to all the AFL Bet Finder tools where you can study teams' form, their statistics in attack, defense, see where their strengths and weaknesses are. And this really helps with betting head-to-heads, totals, handicaps, and also player props. There's also all the player prop trends for disposals and goals, all that information there so you can make really smart betting decisions and have the information at your fingertips where you're not trying to scroll across so many different websites and all that information becomes kind of polluted and very difficult to interpret. So you end up just going with your gut anyway. To make money betting on sports, you have to use statistics and data to strengthen your decision-making process. That's why back over 10 years ago, I started building the Bet Finder tools. Past couple of seasons, I made them available to everyone, and that's going to continue ongoing. So the link's in the description if you want to start following that and making money betting on the AFL. Thanks, guys, for watching. I'll see you in the betting trends preview.